I used to wear a tie every morning. Navy blue, crisp collar, polished shoes. I'd walk into Jefferson High like I owned the place. Maybe I didn't, but to the kids I was Mr. Reynolds, the one who believed in them when no one else did. Old Man Reynolds, some would whisper. He's tough but fair. I taught history, but more than that, I taught life. How to stand up straight, how to listen, how to think. That was 20 years ago. Now, I sit in a wheelchair that smells faintly of bleach and rubber, in a hospital room that's far too white, far too silent. My name's still Reynolds, Charles Reynolds, but here, I'm just another forgotten man with a chart hanging at the foot of his bed. I turned 74 last week. No cake, no cards, just Nurse Diane muttering a quick happy birthday while she changed my four. Any visitors today, Mr. Reynolds? She asked. I lied. Maybe later. My son's probably stuck in traffic. He wasn't. He was never coming. 3 months ago, I slipped on some black ice outside the mailbox. Compound fracture. My neighbor, Old Lady Jenkins, called 911. I remember the sound of my femur snapping, and then the cold sky spinning above me like I was inside a snow globe someone shook too hard. That was the last time I saw my house. I was supposed to be transferred home after rehab. That's what they told me. Just until you're stable again, Dad. My son Jeremy had said, holding my hand like he meant it. We'll figure it out together. 2 days later, I overheard the discharge nurse say the word, abandonment. Jeremy signed papers. He left me here. No explanation. No visit since. I wasn't always this way. Hell, I used to be somebody. My wife, Linda, died 10 years ago. Breast cancer. She was my best friend. We'd been married 42 years. After she passed, I threw myself into teaching even harder. I had something to give, even if I came home to an empty house. Jeremy used to call every Sunday. Hey, Dad, just checking in. We talk football, taxes, his 2 boys, my grandsons Tyler and Max. I used to send them books for Christmas. History books, of course. I even signed the front pages. But eventually the calls stopped. The books came back unopened. There's a clock on the wall in this room that ticks too loud. I started naming the hours. 10 o'clock is regret. Noon is shame. For P.M. is the hour Linda would make coffee and fold laundry while humming Motown under her breath. 7 p.m. That's betrayal. I watch the nurses come and go. None of them look me in the eye. I get it. I'm just another chart. Another liability. They're not cruel, just distant. One night, I heard a nurse whisper to another near the door. That's the guy whose son dumped him here. Can you believe that? As if I were already a ghost. I tried calling Jeremy. Once. It rang twice before a woman picked up. His wife. Charles? She asked, her voice clipped. I was hoping to talk to Jeremy. I said. Pause. He's busy, Charles. I'm sorry. Then the line went dead. It's funny. I taught hundreds of kids. Some went on to become doctors, lawyers, writers. I remember their names, their dreams. But my own son, he just turned the page on me. And now I sit at a window that faces a parking lot, watching strangers come and go. They all have somewhere to be, someone waiting for them. I envy that. I'm not angry yet. That comes later. Right now I'm just tired. But I still remember who I am. Mr. Charles Reynolds. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember too. But not like this. Not while I'm still breathing. It was on a Thursday that I found the letter. It wasn't meant for me. That much was clear. One of the nurses, a young man named Kevin who sometimes slipped me an extra pudding cup if the head nurse wasn't watching, had dropped it on my tray by mistake. He was rushing, maybe distracted, maybe just careless, but he never came back for it. It was a manila envelope. No name on it. Just the hospital's return address and the words, "To be filed." I shouldn't have opened it. But something inside me whispered, "Open it, Charles." And so I did. Inside was a copy of my file. I wasn't supposed to see it. I knew that instantly. But what I read made my hands shake with something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Patient has no active family support. Discharge to long-term care recommended. Patient unaware of final decision made by son, Jeremy Reynolds. Citing emotional and logistical burden. Recommendation. Maintain standard care, no escalated visitation protocol needed. I stared at those words. Emotional and logistical burden. That's what I had become. Not a father. Not a man. Just a burden. I pressed my fingers to the paper so hard they turned white. I was afraid I'd rip it. But the damage had already been done, hadn't it? I folded the letter slowly and slipped it under my pillow. It felt like a betrayal written in cold ink. Sterile, distant, final. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the shadows move across the ceiling like ghosts. Linda would have said, "Don't let this turn you bitter, Charles." But she never saw this version of me. Forgotten, discarded, shrinking inside a place that smelled like antiseptic and loss. I thought of Jeremy. He used to ride on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade. I used to clap at his baseball games even when he struck out. I stayed up all night helping him write his college application essay. I gave him the down payment for his first house. And now he couldn't even look me in the eye. I don't know when I started talking out loud, but I caught myself whispering into the dark. Did I do that bad, son? Was I such a disappointment to you? No answer. Just the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The next morning, I asked Kevin if I could borrow a pen. "Sure, Mr. Reynolds," he said, handing it to me with a small smile. I waited until he left the room before I pulled out an old notebook from my bedside drawer. It was the same notebook where I used to write lesson plans. Yellowed pages, lined, soft from age. I opened it and began to write. Not a complaint, not a plea, a letter. To Jeremy. I wrote with slow hands and steady breath. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just told him what he needed to know. You made a choice, Jeremy. You chose convenience over love. You chose silence over dignity. But I remember every time you fell and I picked you up. I remember your mother whispering, "He's got your eyes, Charles." I remember how proud I was the day you became a father. But I also remember this, how easily you let me go. One day your sons will grow older. One day they'll see what kind of man you are. I won't be there to tell them, but the silence you gave me, it will speak for itself. And you'll hear it when no one else is calling. I signed it, not as Dad, but as Charles Reynolds. I tore the page out carefully and placed it inside the envelope Kevin had dropped. I sealed it and marked the front. For Jeremy. Deliver whenever you see fit. I gave it back to Kevin later that day. "This is for my son," I said. "Please make sure it gets to him eventually." Kevin looked confused, but he nodded. Of course. I didn't tell him what it said. Some truths don't need explanation. Just gravity. That night I didn't feel like a victim. Not anymore. Because for the first time since I arrived in this place I had spoken. And silence, when broken, makes a sound you never forget. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. But something inside me had shifted. The waiting was over. Now. I was watching. I didn't expect him to come. Truth is, I had already buried the hope somewhere deep, where old promises and old memories go to die quietly. So when Nurse Diane knocked softly on my half-open door and said, "Mr. Reynolds, you have a visitor," I thought she meant Kevin, or maybe the social worker who always looked at me like I was a form she needed to finish. But then I heard it, the familiar shuffle, the careful clearing of a throat that wasn't quite confident enough to be casual. Jeremy, my son. He stepped into the room like a man entering a courtroom. Guilty, unwanted, unsure whether he should speak or leave in silence. His hair had more gray than I remembered. His jaw looked tighter, like he'd been clenching it for days. He held his phone in one hand, like it was a shield. "Dad," he said. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to give him anything, not even my gaze. Not yet. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. I got a letter. So Kevin delivered it. Good. Part of me felt the tremble inside him before I saw it. Jeremy wasn't a cruel man, not by nature. But he was a weak one. Weakness can do more damage than malice ever could. He took another small step inside. I didn't know you felt that way. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. You didn't know because you never asked. He flinched. Not dramatically, but enough. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't pain or resignation. I felt clarity. Jeremy lowered himself into the chair beside the bed. It groaned under his weight, as if protesting the sudden demand to hold a burden it didn't recognize. I thought this was the best place for you, he said. That's a lie, I replied evenly. It was the easiest place for you. He swallowed. The truth settled between us like cold fog. I was overwhelmed, he said after a long silence. Work's been insane, the boys. I raised a hand. Just a slow, quiet gesture. Cut him off more effectively than shouting ever could. I taught teenagers who had nothing, I said. I taught children who came from broken homes, who had no fathers, no mothers, no hope. And still, I never left any of them behind. Not once. Jeremy looked down at the floor, his hands twisting nervously. The posture of a child before a teacher. My student, my son. I realized then that he had never outgrown that position. Not in front of me. You were supposed to be better than me, I whispered. Stronger. Kinder. That's what every parent prays for. He finally looked up. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from the effort of holding them back. Dad, I'm sorry. And maybe he truly was. But apologies, I had learned, don't erase choices. They reveal them. You're not here because you're sorry, I said softly. You're here because you're frightened. His jaw tightened. I'm not. You're afraid of what that letter means about you, I continued. Not about me. About you. He didn't deny it. Good. The truth settles only when it stops being fought. For a moment, all we heard was the distant beeping of a heart monitor from another room. Life ticking on. Unconcerned. I leaned just a bit forward in my wheelchair. Not enough to strain. Just enough to make sure he felt the weight of my voice when I said, Jeremy, I won't punish you. That's not who I am. But I will remember. And so will you. He exhaled shakily, a confession hidden in a breath. I reached for the small cup of water beside me, took a sip and set it back down. You want forgiveness? I asked. Then earn it. Not with words. With presence. He nodded slowly. I can try. Try, I echoed. But understand something, son. I paused. This was the moment. The shift. The quiet power returning to my bones. My voice. My spine. I don't need you to save me. I needed you not to abandon me. Those are not the same thing. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time I felt taller. Even sitting down. Even in this forgotten room. Because the truth had been spoken. Measured. Delivered. And it had landed exactly where it needed to. Not as revenge. But as consequence. When Jeremy finally left, he turned at the door and said, barely audible, I'll come back tomorrow. I didn't answer. I simply nodded, calm, steady, dignified. Because the man who entered my room was a stranger. But the man who left, he was a student again. And class had only just begun. After Jeremy left, I didn't cry. There was no need. I had finally said what needed saying. Not in anger, not in weakness, but with a calm that only comes when you know who you are, and you're no longer begging others to remember it. The room felt different now. Still quiet, still small, still smelling like plastic and loneliness. But somehow lighter. The next morning, Kevin wheeled me out to the courtyard. It wasn't much. Just a square patch of concrete with 3 benches, 2 dying shrubs, and a bird bath that hadn't seen a bird in weeks. But there was sun. Real sun. Not filtered through glass. You're looking sharper than usual today, Mr. Reynolds, Kevin said with a grin. I smirked. That's what happens when you bury the past properly. It stops crawling into your bed at night. He laughed, but I could see in his eyes he didn't fully understand. That's fine. He would. I started observing people differently after that. Not just the nurses and aides, but the other residents. The woman in room 302, who used to be a pianist and now spoke only in whispers. The old war vet with Parkinson's who dropped his fork 5 times a meal and never once asked for help. The quiet man in 310 who stared at the wall for hours like it owed him an apology. They all carried stories, heavy ones, and no one was listening, so I started listening. I would ask small questions. What did you used to do? Or, what was your favorite smell as a kid? Little things, seeds, and they bloomed. In that dull, crumbling hallway of forgotten lives, I became a teacher again. No chalkboard, no attendance sheet, just eyes that met mine and said, "You still see me." Thank God. One afternoon, a young nurse's aide, I think her name was Maria, stood outside my door, not realizing I could hear her. She was talking to someone on the phone. Hushed. Annoyed. I swear. This old guy keeps giving me advice like I asked for it. He talks like he's still in a classroom or something. Like he's smarter than me. I almost chuckled. She was half right. I wasn't smarter than her. But I was still teaching. Because the classroom was never the point. It was the calling that mattered. And I hadn't lost mine. A week later, Jeremy showed up again. No tie, no pretense this time. Just jeans, a t-shirt, and eyes that searched me for signs of what he used to see in his father. He brought coffee. Real coffee. Not the hospital kind that tastes like cardboard and regret. "Can I sit?" he asked. I nodded. We sat in silence for a while. A long while. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A crumpled paper. A school essay. It was his. From high school. Dated 1997. The day I saw my dad cry. The title read. My chest tightened. "I found this in a box in the garage," Jeremy said. I'd forgotten all about it. I reached for it slowly. My fingers brushed the old ink like it was holy. He looked down. "You cried the day I left for college," he said. "I didn't understand then. I thought you were just being dramatic. But now," he trailed off. "Now I get it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to say anything. This was enough. Let him learn. Let the silence do the teaching." That night, I wrote another letter. But this time not to Jeremy. To Tyler. My grandson. 17. Almost a man. I didn't say anything dramatic. Just told him who I was. What I believed. That I used to love history because it reminded people they mattered. That he could visit if he wanted. But that he didn't have to. I sealed it with no expectations. Just a quiet offering. A message in a bottle, thrown into the ocean of time. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't waiting. I was watching, listening, writing, teaching. Let them think I was old and slow. Let them think I was fading. They had no idea. I remembered everything. And my mind was sharper than ever. The world may have put me on pause, but I'd already pressed play on something deeper. The final lesson was coming. And it would not be forgotten. The letter to Tyler worked its way through the cracks of silence like water under a closed door. He showed up 3 days later. 17 years old. Taller than I remembered. Hoodie, earbuds, phone in hand. The kind of teenage armor that says, "Don't expect too much." But he came. He stood at the doorway for a full minute, unsure if he should step in or run. "Hey!" he finally muttered. Voice low like a boy who wasn't used to being around old people. I tilted my head slightly and smiled. "You got the letter," I said. "Yeah," he replied, still standing. It was different. Most people don't write letters anymore. I motioned to the chair. "That's why they forget how to say things that matter." He sat. Slowly. Cautiously. We didn't talk about the letter. We didn't talk about his father. We talked about music. About how history repeats itself not because we don't know, but because we don't listen. I told him about the March on Washington, about Kent State, about when we landed on the moon, and people gathered outside stores just to watch black and white TVs through dusty windows. And for an hour, maybe more, he listened. Really listened. Eyes locked on mine. No phone. No earbuds. That day, I wasn't just grandpa. I was a story he'd never heard but suddenly needed to know. That same week, a nurse named Lauren stopped me during my morning wheelchair rounds. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "I heard you used to be a teacher. I still am, I replied. She laughed, but I didn't. She looked curious, a little embarrassed. We've been having trouble with some of the younger aides, she admitted. No patience, no empathy. Would you ever be willing to talk to them? Just for a few minutes? And just like that, something shifted in the air. I wasn't a patient anymore. I was being asked again, like I used to be, like someone who knows something. I said yes. And the next morning, 6 aides sat in the activity room with their arms crossed, skeptical. I told them I'd taught in classrooms where chairs were broken, lights flickered, and kids came to school hungry. I told them I'd seen fear, rage, brilliance, sometimes all in one student. Old people aren't different, I said. They just carry more years. That's it. Same fear, same brilliance. And if you don't look them in the eye, you'll miss it all. Some of them shifted in their seats. One girl cried quietly. None of them looked at their phones. By the end of the week, Tyler came again. This time with Max, the younger one. 14. Quiet, thin. Looked like Jeremy did when he was his age. Eyes always scanning, unsure of his place in the room. Is it okay if he listens? Tyler asked. I nodded. And I began to talk. Not lecture, talk. Like men. Like family. One night, I was wheeled into the cafeteria. Jeremy was there. So were the boys. And Kevin. And Nurse Lauren. Even Maria, the aide who once rolled her eyes at me, stood near the back, hands clasped in front of her like she was afraid to breathe too loud. Jeremy stood up and cleared his throat. I just wanted to say something, he began. Most of you know my father as Mr. Reynolds. Some just know him as the man in room 307. But before that, he was my teacher. Long before he was my teacher, he was everyone's. He looked at me, and I forgot that. I forgot who he was. I watched him, and I think maybe some of you did too. There was no applause, no music, no dramatic swelling of strings like in the movies, just silence, the kind that wraps around the truth like a warm coat. Later that night, Jeremy sat next to my bed. You're different, he said. So are you, I replied. He looked down. Why didn't you scream at me, or push me away? Because I knew the silence would echo louder, I said. And because your guilt is a better teacher than my rage. He nodded. And that was it. Nothing more needed saying. I slept that night without waking once. No ghosts. No regrets. I had given my final lesson without ever raising my voice. And they had all heard it. Even if they didn't clap. Especially because they didn't. Winter came. Not violently. Not with storms or drama. Just slowly. Like the way old bones start to ache when rain is on the horizon. The leaves disappeared. The courtyard benches frosted over. The nurses wore thicker scrubs and walked faster down the halls. I stayed in my room more. Not out of weakness, out of choice. I had said what needed to be said. I had taught what needed to be taught. And now I was resting, but not fading. Tyler still came. Once a week, sometimes more. Max too. They brought books, real ones. No screens. Tyler liked philosophy. Max liked maps. I liked that they still asked questions. And Jeremy? He came every Sunday now. Always with coffee. Sometimes just for 15 minutes. Sometimes longer. He never brought up the hospital paperwork again. He never apologized again either. He didn't need to. He stayed. And that was more than I had ever asked for. One morning, as frost clung to the window like quiet lace, I woke before the nurses came. The sun hadn't risen yet. The halls were still. The world was paused. I sat in my wheelchair, pulled the blanket tight across my lap, and watched the sky begin to glow. Not much, just a soft blue, cracking into gray, like light remembering it had a job to do. And in that silence, I understood something I wish I'd known earlier. We all disappear eventually, but if we've done it right, our silence speaks when we're gone. Not in headlines, not in eulogies, in echoes, in the way someone remembers a phrase we once said, the way they treat a stranger, the way they hold a moment longer before walking away. That's the real afterlife. And I was living mine already, Kevin stopped by around 8 a.m. He knocked and peeked in. "Morning, Mr. Reynolds." I nodded. "Kevin." He looked sheepish. "I started reading history after you talked about Kent State. Got me thinking." "Good," I said. "Thinking is dangerous. That's why most people avoid it." He laughed. "That sounds like something you'd put on a chalkboard." "I used to," I smiled. "Back when people still read chalkboards." He hesitated at the door. "You know, some of the younger aides started calling you the professor behind your back." I grinned. "Behind my back is the safest place to talk about me." Kevin smiled, then turned serious. "I hope they name a room after you when you're gone." I looked at him, steady. "No need," I said. "Just remember what I said in it." Weeks passed, then months. My hands grew slower. My legs, already weak, stopped moving altogether. But my mind was brighter than ever. I remembered things from 50 years ago with razor clarity. I whispered old poems to myself. I recited Lincoln's second inaugural from memory when no one was around. No one needed to hear it but me. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of death. Not of being forgotten. Because I knew now. I had left a mark. Not a monument. A message. And they had heard it. On my last day, I didn't know it would be my last. I woke up early. Made it to the window. Watched the sky turn gold. Jeremy arrived late that afternoon. He said he didn't know why he came that day. Just felt something in his chest. We talked for an hour. Then I asked for silence. And we sat. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just quiet. The kind of quiet you share with someone when you finally understand each other without needing to speak. That night, they said I passed in my sleep. Peacefully. Quietly. Not alone. They found a note on my nightstand. The last thing I ever wrote. It said, "Don't mourn the man in the bed. He's not there anymore. He walked out through the silence you gave him. If you learned anything from me, teach it. If you remember anything, pass it. And if you loved me, live like I still see you. Because I do." They didn't build a statue. They didn't name a building. But months later, the aides started a weekly class called Reynolds Hour. Not mandatory, no grades, just a time to listen to the stories of the residents, to ask about their pasts, to remember, and every now and then, a young man named Tyler tells his own story to others. About his grandfather, about a forgotten room, about a man who never stopped teaching, even when no one called him teacher anymore. And in that telling, my voice lives on, still teaching, still watching, still here.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.